A flirting app called Scout eliminates services for teens in the wake of 3 sexual assault cases. I'm Winnie O'Kelly, reporting for Business Day Live. JP Morgan Chief Executive Jamie Dimon is just beginning his testimony in front of the Senate Banking Committee. We'll look back at his strong stewardship during the financial crisis and why he is now facing questions about his firm's risk controls and management. And Eduardo Porter joins us with a take on why women still earn less in the workplace. But first, Quentin Hardy joins us from Burbank to talk about Scout. Hi, Quentin.
Hey, how are you, Winnie?
Very good. You know, this is really a startling development, I think, for parents everywhere. This service called Scout, which was popular with teens, although it was started for adults, has led to some really atrocious accusations of adults abusing children. And now it's gotten rid of the service for teenagers. What's the reaction?
Well, I just wish it were more than, I wish it were something less than accusations. The fact is, Scout is a mobile social application for strangers to meet and kind of party and flirt around the world. They started a year ago to have a teen site, and there are 3 documented cases of adults luring children into situations where there were rapes and, child molestation. And Scout yesterday kind of caught wind of all this and shut down the teen site. But what they said was a couple of bad actors have gotten involved, and we're shutting it down temporarily until we have better safeguards to verify the actual age of people. And the teens who are reacting to this are just saying, hey, what happened? How come you shut down my site? They have no sense of the net magnitude of what's happened inside their own community.
This is something that all these social sites have to deal with, including Facebook. People lie about their ages. It's very hard to know what's going on. Yet Scout and Facebook have made some attempts, right, to put extra privacy on and to make it harder for people to abuse these sites. Is there really any way to protect young people?
Well, it surfaces and magnifies a kind of latent problem in our society, doesn't it? I mean, tech just leverages what's already there. But you might question whether you want for teenagers. And you certainly think parents should be involved to the degree they understand what kind of applications are on their kids' phones and who their kids are talking to.
It seems that one of the things that's really changing here in the world of social media, we went from the sites that were intended to bring you together with your closest friends and sort of give you a way to communicate with each other, to lots of sites now that are intended to help you connect with strangers. I was thinking of the Sean Parker latest entry into the field. Is this the growing trend to connect with people you've never met before?
We are all broadcasters now, and we are all searching for audiences. And maybe this was a latent part of our natures, but technology makes it possible to do this on a scale no one's ever seen before. And Winnie, it's just getting started because translation technology is getting better and better, and soon it won't even matter what language you're speaking. You'll be able to encounter anyone, anywhere. And it does make it incumbent on people to understand the rules, understand bad actors, and have filters and surveillance perhaps on underage people to see what's going on in there.
Well, we're going to have to watch how this develops. Thank you so much for shedding some light on all of this today, Quentin.
Take care.
All right. JP Morgan chief Jamie Dimon staked his reputation on being more trustworthy than other banking chiefs. But in the wake of major losses at JP Morgan and accusations of poor risk management, some say he deserves more scrutiny. Jessica Silver Greenberg filed this report.
Mr. Dimon's testimony today is important in part because for a long time he was considered Washington's favorite banker. He was untouchable because he had deftly navigated the bank through the financial crisis in far better shape than so many of its rivals. And the loss that he's being called upon to account for today in front of Congress is seen by many as a profound failure in risk management.
In how we managed that portfolio, we did lose $2 billion trading. And in hindsight, we took far too much risk. The strategy we had was barely vetted. It was barely monitored. It should never have happened.
On April 13th, which was the bank's earnings call, Jamie Dimon, he called concerns about the movement in the market, the distortion of credit prices within the market. He called all those concerns a tempest in a teapot. And so I think what lawmakers are looking for and want to hear more about is really what he understood when he made those statements. So did he actually know about the extent of the losses? Did he know that, you know, at the moment the losses could be estimated at amount to at least $5 billion? So at what point did he understand the extent of these losses? And I think that lawmakers today are going to be very curious about that and pushing him hard to answer those questions. So in terms of consumer banking, you're not going to see much of an impact. I mean, this is really, it goes to the center of rules that are being written now, the Volcker Rule, which restricts what banks can do with deposits. There's one part of it that's been particularly at issue, and Jamie Dimon has been a very vocal banker in opposition to these rules that would restrict the bets that they can make with their own money. It's called proprietary trading. So there's been a lot of debate around whether this $2 billion loss is in fact proprietary trading. Most people don't think that it is. There's not really a debate about the nature of the trade. It does give ammunition to some in Washington who've been calling for stricter reform, stricter basically parameters for what banks can and cannot do.
I'm joined now by Eduardo Porter, who has a surprising take on gender discrimination in the workplace. Thanks for being here, Eduardo.
Hey, good morning, Winnie.
I'm guessing you have a few angry notes and emails this morning from people who read your column and think that, you know, maybe there's something to this gender discrimination in the workplace. But let's go to the facts, right? We know that there's a difference between what men and women are paid, and we know that gap was closing for years.
Yeah.
And now it's not so much.
Yeah.
Why is it?
Well, the gap is still closing, but it's closing much slower than it had been. So sort of about, I would say, 15 years ago, it slowed down. So right now there's about an 18% pay gap. So a man, your typical man earns 18% more per week than your typical woman working full time. And you know, that's down from about 40% in the 1970s. So it's substantial, but there is still a very big remaining gap. And I mean, there's a natural, kind of like an instinctual belief that this must be due to discrimination. And when economists have started looking at this, they have found that, in fact, probably most of it is due to forces that make it difficult for women to work. Because women have share such a large burden of the family work, you know, of raising children, having children, and doing housework, they tend to leave the workforce more, they tend to work fewer hours, they tend to interrupt their careers more often, and that ends up costing them along their career. So if you look at men and women right after college, the pay gap is actually much smaller. If you look at them like 10, 15 years out, the pay gap has grown much, much bigger because these things that, you know, these career interruptions and so on have started hurting.
But when you try to strip out all those things, the idea that maybe women go into some fields that are less competitive or that are less rigorous in terms of hours worked or whatever, you still find some pay gap, right?
Well, that's indeed, I mean, it depends on the profession. There are professions that are very unforgiving. Investment banking,
Right.
law. There, the cost of flexibility is very, very large. So the pay gap is quite substantial.
Okay.
In other fields, like, you know, veterinary, pharmacy, the gap, in fact, one study I saw concluded that there was no pay gap in pharmacy at all, because that particular occupation is such that it doesn't really matter. If you work, you know, 75% of the time, you get 75% of the money. It's very kind of linear. So there is very little pay gap there. So that's kind of like what's suggesting the way to solve this is to encourage businesses to, you know, to make this flexibility possible.
But we know there's subtle bias out there. Come on.
Yes.
The symphony example is a terrific one, right?
That's right.
When they started auditioning people behind curtains where they didn't know what sex they were, women started performing much better, right?
No, that's true. I mean, indeed, I do not mean to say that discrimination does not exist. I think that it mostly is of the form that you just referred to. There was a study that found that when women auditioned behind a screen so that the judges didn't know who was auditioning, women started becoming much more successful at getting into symphony orchestras.
Right.
So clearly there was a bias there. And I think that bias operates pretty much in this way. Women are given different sorts of jobs, they're put on different career tracks, sometimes even subconsciously, you know, the employer doesn't even really know that just why there's no like real conscious thought process. It's just natural to put women in a different career path, and so there is that kind of discrimination going on for sure. The question is, how do you address that kind of discrimination?
Right.
And it is it's a very difficult nut to crack.
Okay, so let's talk about that. If we don't know how much of it's choice and how much of it's force, if you will, between women being tracked in different directions and they're choosing to have more time with families, how do we make changes? You know, is it something you can legislate? Is it something you can make a difference with?
Well, out of the examples out there in the world, some successful policies have to do with actually making it easier for women to work, stay at work, and have children and keep a family. So some
Examples,
of them are
yeah.
extended leave policies, although you can't make them too extended because then you actually encourage women to stay out of work. But,
Right.
but you know, so some of these things have been tried in Scandinavia and some other European countries. You know, extended leave policies, subsidized childcare policies to make it easier for women to be at work and have somebody take care of their kid. Policies to encourage men to take a greater share of the burden. So there are some, for
That's
instance,
fascinating.
parenting policy, parenting leave that's specifically targeted at fathers. So fathers must take it. It can't be taken by mothers. And so that's
Just evens the things out of the
that's
workforce.
right, an attempt to even these things out. And you know, one thing that's kind of like a little out of left field that would be an interesting policy to look at is, I mean, a lot of the gender gap here is due to the fact that we have a very, very unequal distribution of income for men and women.
Right.
So if you just put Sweden's or France's income distribution on the United States labor market, the gap between men and women would shrink a lot, just because the gap between high earners and low earners would shrink a lot.
So the inequality we talk about in this country plays a significant role here.
Indeed it does.
All right. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you very much, Winnie.
That's all for today. Please stay with us online at nytimes.com for our continuing coverage of this and other stories. I'm Winnie O'Kelly, reporting for Business Day Live. Thanks for watching.